another edition of the Omnist Hour. Okay, well, since yesterday we focused in on Lilith a bit, I thought we ought to follow with a little time spent talking about this Lucifer cat. Her alter ego, if you will. Okay, so what am I going to title this one? Oops, I didn't put it where I wanted to. I'm going to call this one Lucifer in a New Light, an all-father-side chat for enlisted men. Okay, so yesterday, as we talked about, the Big Bang was actually two universes that were created. One that was basically inhabited, staffed by a volunteer from the Borg side, Lilith. I like to call this soul, although those names didn't exist then. Names weren't needed then. They were thoughts, they were energies. That's how you knew who was who back in the days before language, before history, before time. Okay, the other universe was, as I mentioned yesterday, staffed by a volunteer from God's team. Now, if you know the difference between God and Borg, you know that their method of picking volunteers is very different. The Borg side picks volunteers kind of like Joseph Stalin would, or Mao Zedong, or Xi Jinping. You're the volunteer. Go fight the good fight for me. Lucifer was an enlisted man, an enlisted soul, volunteered to take this role, perhaps somewhat unselfishly, perhaps selfishly, as volunteering often happens. This was a soul that admired God and thought that he could create as well as God using the same methodology. And he volunteered to be the one that basically was the embodiment of this godly universe. The universe of responsible creators who valued free will, free choice, honesty, openness, the letter of the spirit of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And as such, Lucifer was a perfect choice for this other universe. Very law-minded, fair-minded soul who really disliked kind of the freewheeling ways of the Borg team. A very literalist soul. Just the facts, ma'am. If you ever watched the old Dragnet series, the Jack Webb character, that's a pretty good impression of the kind of personality that Lucifer was. When he started this whole thing, he was very sure of himself, very sure of the validity of the God side, so much that he was willing to put his soul on the line, as it were, and be the first guinea pig of incarnation. Because in order to have anything else, you have a universe to have it in. And he was the body of the first universe for quite some time. Now, as I talked about with the Lilith situation, you change incarnations. You don't have to stick to the same body, even back then. And the players that represented those two original universes were able to take on other incarnations when they wanted to, when they chose to. And they did so, leaving behind them basically the latest AI version of themselves. And that's basically how those two universes work. And they are constantly sort of upgrading their operating system as Lucifer or Lilith learns more about themselves and brings it back to their universe. And this is essentially what happens at the next higher level up with God, because the multiverse was his idea, not Borg's. He talked Borg into it. Which is kind of the difference between God and the adversary. So Lucifer has been known by many names since. And some of his incarnations took on the shape of God's chief warrior, if you will. Archangel Michael is one name that he's been known by. Sir Lancelot is an archetype of Lucifer, a dedicated warrior devoted to his king, which that's kind of the way, well, a lot of people still view God, even though that's not what he is. Better to view God as a father, a progenitor, a first creator, not necessarily the most powerful at any given point. In fact, especially not when he's busy incarnating somewhere, but certainly the most influential and the one with the most experience by definition. Okay, so Lucifer's taken on a lot of roles. He also has taken on roles kind of as a judge. That's something that souls often like to do. Once they kind of get over their fighting phase of their path, they tend to want to move on to government. Roles that require more judgment. And as such, that's where you meet Lucifer as essentially the devil, the archetypal devil, who makes deals with errant souls to test them. And as such, honors those deals. Actually, this is why you talk, there's the phrase, making a deal with the devil. Borg's team doesn't make deals. Or if they do, they don't honor them. So you're actually a lot better off dealing with the devil. The temptations of somebody who is honoring contracts than the temptations of somebody who doesn't have any honor, doesn't have any respect, does not have any respect for karma, which you can see all around us in the way that the world works today. There are some powers that have at least a nominal respect for karma. They have an idea that their leaders, their government, is a mandate from a god that might punish them if they don't act in a way that is consistent with the perhaps the Ten Commandments, perhaps a better understanding of karma. And, Sharia law maybe goes a little bit too far on the Muslim side, at least in some areas, of being too harsh law. The law-focused folk of every universe are all descended from Satan. You start by being the devil's advocate, and you end up being the judge. And there's a lot of temptation there. And it's a lot of power there. Similarly, the generals of the world, the great military leaders, have tended to be descendants of Archangel Michael, another manifestation of Lucifer. The Alexander the Greats, the Napoleons, Genghis Khan. And we've seen some of those that were pretty noble-minded in general, and others that were kind of dark conquerors. And that's the truth about the divine male, which is the Lucifer archetype. Just as the Lilith archetype is the divine female, in many manifestations, better or worse, that's the truth about the divine male. Okay, so the male demiurge, the female demiurge, both have their very, very dark sides. And neither one of them is God. Just like Borg is not God. The hive mind authoritarian controller of, would-be controller of the multiverse, is not the first creator. The real God, the first creator, gave you free will. Cooked up this crazy system of using physical creation, spiritual creation, even God creations, 3 levels of simulation to provide structure and form to the aspirations, the thoughts of souls that were previously pure consciousness. And that made the game of being a soul a lot more fun. It's kind of similar to how you can imagine the life of an everyday person who's got an everyday job these days, who likes to disconnect and play video games. Fantasy football, likes to live in kind of a fantasy world in their spare time. That's essentially what we're all doing in all kinds of incarnations. Now, that doesn't mean that these aren't important things, because these shape us. These are how we meet new friends. This is how we discover who we are and who we like to be with. And that's very important in the multiverse, because that's going to affect where you end up as you explore your path. Whether you end up in the universe of one of the darker, more Borg-like gods, the authoritarians, the illusionist gods who milk your spiritual energies while giving you pleasant fantasies or unpleasant fantasies, depending on how they feel like they're getting the most milk out of you, or whether you're playing in more realistic universes where what you see is what you get, in an illusory sort of way, where karma is out on the open, where the laws are adhered to, where you don't get to suddenly declare the speed of light is blah. You don't get to suddenly transmute water into gold, any of the silly things that dark occultists of the Middle Ages thought they would do if they could just find the right levers of power. Yeah, so Lucifer in that sense is a tempter, but the mode of operation is very different than the archetypical temptress, Lilith. Lucifer throws out temptations, but tries not to throw out more than you can handle, and is always respectful of a refusal. So, you know, if you look at the, well, I like to bring up Joan of Arc as a very good example because her vision is so well documented. Okay, if you read the transcripts of her trials and what she said about her dreams and visions, she believed that she came to be talked to by the Archangel Michael. Now, that was her interpretation. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was another incarnation of this archetype, a descendant of Lucifer, whose particular mission was defending the idea of France. That would certainly be consistent with what was happening, because the Archangel Michael certainly didn't care whether the British or the French ruled France. Didn't care who was going to be the next king of France. Didn't care how long the 100 Years' War was going to last. But she thought that she was being inspired by the Archangel Michael. And if you read how her voices talked to her, they were not forceful. They didn't say, you must. They didn't say, well, if you don't do this, this is going to happen to you. In fact, they were very honest. They said, you know, this is something we need you to do. And they told her flat out that it was going to be painful and she was going to be persecuted and she would eventually die for her faith. Now that is an honest temptation, as opposed to the kind of temptation of the real adversary, the Lilith, the Borg. They tempt with fake promises, false promises of glory, false promises of righteousness, false promises of what the future is going to be like in their perfect universe. And as such, the God of the Old Testament was more of a Lilith than a Lucifer. And that's something that is, you know, definitely part of the Gnostic idea of faith. That goes back to the Hermetic tradition. However, that is not God. The opposite of not God is not God, it's something else, potentially. And so their fatal error in saying, well, Lucifer is God, is that they open themselves to the temptation of the dark side of the male demiurge. And they close themselves off to the light side of the female demiurge. And they perpetuate the struggle between these forces which are driving creation, and misjudge good as evil and misjudge evil as good. And to the point that many on both sides are saying, well, I don't know what's evil or good. It must all be good, or it must all be evil. And that's been the theme of a lot of religious thought for thousands of years. Because, in fact, nobody knew that the real God was not either of these two archetypal souls that were kind of the center of the two universes of the Big Bang. That's very confusing for a lot of people. It's led to all the confusion, basically, of all the religions humanity has ever had, and the species that came before humanity in the Gaia experiment, to the extent that they invented gods and lost memory of who the real All-Father was. They fell down the same dark path. Okay, so, one of the things that makes it difficult for many souls is that, if you discount Borg, which is the real adversary, the real enemy of creation, you've got these three souls that seem to be the ones you're most inclined to want to follow. I don't know. Maybe you want to follow Borg. Maybe you want an authoritarian, micromanaging ruler of every universe. At any rate, who to worship among these four souls, who to follow, is not always easy, especially when, of the souls that manifest themselves most visibly in the physical realm, in the spiritual realm, are two guys and a girl. That's considered kind of unfair. That's why so many women have a problem with Christianity. Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And that shows a male trouble with Christianity too, because the Holy Ghost is definitely a female presence. And it's just a reimagining of Trinity that makes less sense, actually, than the Isis, Osiris, and Horus manifestation of the Trinity archetype. At any rate, if you could come to think of Lucifer as God's son, another fallen angel, one that fell of his own accord, like a good soldier, took one for the team. This is who Lucifer is, and his better descendants. Now, Lucifer has also had a tough time waking up since we added the law of reincarnation amnesia to the game here. And that has caused quite a bit of angst. There are darker versions of Lucifer running around that are resentful, angry, maybe even have come to hate God, the real God, or work against him. Just like the different versions of Lilith, who all women are descended from. At any rate, I think what I would hope out of these two talks about Lilith and Lucifer, you will come to understand is that the divine feminine, the divine male are not all great, wonderful, good, perfect. You don't want to worship one or the other. You don't want to ignore either of them because they are very experienced souls. You can learn a lot from them. You can learn a lot from their descendants and their followers. They tend to be well, at least the ones that are kind of caught up in the power trip of incarnation, they tend to be ones that want worship. Okay? So, and they want physical power. They want to have, especially beings on this very special planet, Gaia, looking to them and thinking that they are the ones organizing this whole experiment. Because to a large extent, they've forgotten who God was. And they've found it easy to rationalize, I'm God, as so many of you are rationalizing now in the New Age movement. Either thinking you are or can be a God, or already a God, or you're part of Source, which is God. You're not doing anything that these two old soul friends of the real God haven't done already. And you're just maybe doing it in a lot more violent and karmically dark way because you don't really understand what you're doing. You're not conscious enough to play the game at a level that is really doing you much good. And that's the whole point of the game, is that you've got to get experience. You got to see karma from many angles before you can be the better version of yourself. And I hope what you heard in the last few days is there's a lot of good and dark versions of even the oldest children of God. They've all learned a lot from this process in every stage of it. And we're just at the last stage of isolating this process of evolution on this very special planet, Earth, in this very special solar system that has been very special for a long, long time. The aliens that are saying that they created you, well, who created them? Another species back here. Maybe doesn't exist anymore, has been wiped out, extincted, but sent some of their creations, some of their members, or evolved members off to other stars who forgot where they came from and are now coming back. They don't know. They don't have any more idea who God is than those of you who are saying, Rob, you must be nuts. I know who God is. God is Jesus. God is love. God is this. God is that. Okay, the aliens are just as confused as you. And they're learning their way. And that's okay. Not everybody needs to know the full truth, the absolute truth, and nothing but the truth. In fact, it's impossible to cram every bit of fact into one soul. That's why God had to create other souls. If we were all one, we were all source, you'd have every last thing packed into one package. You wouldn't need to experience anything. You wouldn't need to create anything. It would already be packaged up in this one, which is why the oneness thing is complete bollocks nonsense. You are an individual. You are descended from gods. You are descended from the first creator, God. But you are not those gods. You never will be. You might be comparable. You might even be higher in some hierarchy of godhood, because a lot of the old gods have given up trying to be God, and they found something they really like to specialize in. Like, for instance, one of the nicer incarnations of Lucifer was the god Apollo, who was a god of the arts and sciences. And he didn't want to have everything himself, so he thought, hey, I'm going to have some children. I'm going to call them the Muses. I like girls, so they're all going to be female. And that's how the Muses came about. This was a very good approximation to how the system actually works under the current version of karma. There's a god of everything. There's a hierarchy. There's a god of science, and then that god has a bunch of different specialty gods report to him. Or goddesses. There's only a few positions that are restricted to male or female. The goddess of sex is one of those, not of love. That was kind of a poor conception of the role of the goddess in the battle of the sexes. It caused a lot of consternation because there is so much uncertainty over what love really is. And ultimately, the battle of the sexes is about sex. And so the goddess of sex is the goddess who heals sexual problems, sexual dysmorphia, sexual addictions. And that's actually how it used to work. I don't know, we were supposed to be talking about Lucifer right now, but I think I'm kind of on a riff, so I'm going to tell you something that in the old days, before Christianity, in the pagan days, there were cults of worship where the goddess had a temple and she had acolytes who were basically temple prostitutes. That wasn't, at least initially, a bad thing. The idea was that women could voluntarily serve the goddess, and through going to the temple and being a holy prostitute, that was considered a service to the community. It was considered a much healthier way to provide that service than capitalistic prostitution, if you will. It was organized prostitution that was done within holy constraints. The children that were produced through those unions were considered gifts of the gods, and they were raised by the priests and priestesses, and often became the leaders of the community. And that actually was how societies, at least on a city-wide basis, functioned better than they did later on when kingships became hereditary. In fact, that's kind of the truth of, people say, well, when women ran things, everything was better. Well, that's not really what was going on, folks. What was happening is that these temples that had the prostitution, they also trained, and the next leader was chosen by an assembly from these children of God. That's why you have so many legends about famous leaders being the children of gods. Even in the later age, for instance, Julius Caesar and his line of emperors that started from his nephew Octavian, they claim to be descended from Aphrodite, or Venus, actually, the Roman goddess of love. Yes, they came through a line of these temple children. And that was how society was governed once upon a time, before both men and women started putting more faith in their DNA than they did in their community, in their culture. And to the extent that we are still augured in on our own DNA, we're falling down the same trap that societies have been falling in for a long time. We may be doing it technologically, and that may be actually worse in the long run, because now we're starting to muck with DNA, enhance it, tweak it, specialize it. Well, you're specializing, you're changing the soul vehicle, not the soul. Okay? And if you don't know that, you're going to be changing the vehicle in a way that could be very unhealthy for the driver. And that's essentially what's going on right now culturally. You've got everybody getting dumbed down by pop culture to the lowest common denominator. You've got kids raised that can't tell the difference between Britney Spears and Mozart. Or if they can, they like Britney Spears better because it's got a beat. This is dumbing down. I'm sorry. Oh, you say Rob is an elitist. No, I'm sorry. It's the truth. The cold, hard truth of our society is that we are creating a society of DNA-worshipping retards, because we are feeding delusions about what DNA is, what our technology is doing for us, at the expense of the soul, our real self, what we're really about in all this. And that's holding a lot of souls back, making sure that they have to incarnate again and again and again and again, listening to absurd music that they don't learn anything from, trance music. That's a form that I'm really not very fond of. I'm not very fond of rap either, although at least if you read the lyrics, it has some value as stand-up comedy, although it has very little musical value. At any rate, I think I've talked enough about Lucifer. Next one is going to be kind of the pièce de résistance. I'm going to give you a heads up on the next topic, so you can look forward to it. The next topic's going to be called the first Noel, an all-father side chat for Christmas. So I don't know when I'm going to get around to doing that, probably in the next few days, but that's going to be one that you'll want to catch, because it kind of ties together a lot of things that we sort of touched on briefly in the last few chats. At any rate, till next time, this is Rob Trump for the Honest Hour. Like, share, subscribe, and till later, happy karma. Oh, is that the right fingers? Happy karma. No, that can't be right. Happy karma. Happy karma. I like that one the best. I've always been kind of a bull guy. At any rate, we'll catch you later. Take care.